So, yes. So now I'm going to stop sharing the screen and give it over to you. Albena, are you there?
Thank you, Jan. Can you hear me well?
Yes, yes.
Very well. I'm very pleased to be virtually in Iceland, and I was extremely happy to see the Prime Minister here. The Prime Minister mentioned the Progressive International. The website was launched yesterday with a piece I co-authored with James Galbraith. So I urge everybody to follow up on that. Battlegrounds of justice. What really grieves the 99%? This is how I titled my talk, because of course we need to start from proceed from a diagnosis of the evils before we start fighting them. So the fight against inequality was the main battleground in the war on injustice before the pandemic. Tax the rich was the rallying cry of progressive forces. The pandemic has laid bare existing inequalities and deepened them further. The economically most fragile groups, the homeless, the immigrants, those in the low-skilled service industries, have been hardest hit both by the contamination and by the means to fight the contamination, by the lockdown measures. So the logic of the class struggle, unsurprisingly, is back with us. It's revived with new rigor by forces of the radical left. In the adjacent battlefield, that of the political center, something else is happening. As businesses go bankrupt, livelihoods are being lost, and our economies are shrinking, a powerful capital-labor alliance is emerging, anxiously pushing for the return to growth. Thus, across these two battlefields of justice, a consensus is emerging on the conviction that we need to return to the growth and redistribution formula that provided the inclusive prosperity of the post-war welfare state. This, I believe, would be a mistake. The growth and redistribution policy mantra is detrimental to another urgent policy priority, ecological sustainability. We will do well to recall that the post-World War II egalitarian or relatively egalitarian affluence was achieved through the pseudo-Keynesian formula. I say pseudo because Keynes did not exactly believe in that approach, but it has been ascribed to him, the formula of stimulating demand to grow the pie and then distribute it. But the foundation of that success, increased production and consumption, eventually wrecked the environment. Now, however, the pandemic is revealing a third battleground of justice. Let us enter into it from the following paradox. Our societies have never been so affluent and so knowledgeable. We know how to edit DNA. We collect organic compounds from Saturn's moons. Yet our governments have been unable, many of them have been unable to ensure the basic protective equipment that medical personnel need to do their job in times of the pandemic. So how come? The reason is that our societies are privately rich but publicly poor, to use the famous wording of that great thinker, John Kenneth Galbraith, who sounded that alarm already in 1958 in his little book, The Affluent Society. The past 4 decades of structural adjustment policies, of reduction of job security, and slashing of public spending on essential services, including healthcare, That process has dramatically diminished the governing capacity in democracies and has weakened our societies. Now let's remember why these policies were launched in the first place. That started happening in the late 20th century for the sake of ensuring the national competitiveness in the global market. That was the discourse. After the financial meltdown of 2008, these same structural adjustment policies were further deepened for the sake of financial stabilization. As I note in my new book, Capitalism on Edge, contemporary capitalism has thus created not just a precarious class, what the economist Guy Standing has called the precariat, but a precarious multitude. The pathology of precarity, of social and economic instability, afflicts rich and poor, men and women, the well-educated overachievers, and the poorly paid, low-skilled workers. This generalized precarity is not that essential frailty we all have as human beings that is making us vulnerable to the virus. No, it is something else. It is a social condition that has been politically crafted. It has been caused by the combination of automation and the neoliberal policy formula of free and open markets. For the sake of staying competitive in the global market, governments engaged in liberalization of product and labor markets, as I said, as well as in slashing public spending. The demolition of the infrastructure of public service provision is the main reason, not the only one, but probably the main reason why our societies turn out to be so well equipped to fight the contamination by a pathogen which, let's admit it, was not completely unfamiliar nor terribly deadly. Our societies have seen worse. So the other point to take into account is that indeed this social precarity is severely stratified. The inequality of precarity is unjust and we need to fight it. But that fight for equality should not distract us from the root cause of the injustice, the politically engineered social massive precarity as the general pathology of our times. To say that we should be equal in an unjust system further validates that unjust system and deepens the injustice that we're supposed to be fighting. A fallacy in my book I call the paradox of emancipation, that while we're fighting one injustice, we deepen another because we attribute more value to the system within which we're seeking for equality and inclusion. Now, even conservative-led governments issue huge payments to shore up some workers' income-depleted bank accounts. But the condition of general social precarity cannot be remedied through redistribution alone. Note that equality implies a logic of comparison between individuals and groups and presents the idea of social justice in individualistic terms. When we fight for equality, we in fact remain captive of the neoliberal policy logic according to which individuals and groups are responsible for their well-being. This is not socialist. There is nothing very radical about that. It is the notion of collective well-being that has always been fundamental to socialism. A privately wealthy society, even if not too unequal, can still be precarious if essential public services are missing or deficient of funds. So this diagnosis of the problem points to a way out. We need to place at the heart of our social justice agenda not the ideals of shared affluence, but the goal of fighting precarity. Only in this way we can reconcile the social justice agenda and the green justice agenda, which are otherwise incompatible if the social justice agenda is built on the idea of growth and redistribution. So we need to aspire to social stability and environmental security at the same time, and the two are overlapping on the point of fighting precarity. Anti-precarity politics can be achieved by building what I call a political economy of trust, which makes the satisfaction of human needs rather than the pursuit of profit our social priority. This starts from building a different kind of globalization and different type of European integration committed to high environmental and labor standards, because this would reduce the competitive pressures which are causing the social destabilization. Not exclusively, but a lot of the pressures come from the type of globalization we have currently. This means also making long-term investments in essential social services, but also disconnecting personal revenue from profit-generating activity. So we need to think in that direction. And I hope that the rest of this conference will clarify the way forward. This is from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alpena. Bakar, you're there, I see. So I'll ask you to be first, please.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Albena, for very interesting overview you gave about like the challenges or the fate of the global neoliberal capitals today. I was just thinking that it's just all about crisis of politics. Yes, it's about the historic catastrophe of a state to seek for the public interest, to be a protector of the public interest. Yes, and this is a cultural and political consequence of the global neoliberal order. Yes, like to manipulate with this concept of freedom, and by using this method, by using this principle to exclude and to marginalize the notion and the concept of public interest. Yes, and the point is that this process, this dominant process of the like cynical perception of the state, like degrading the idea of the state as a protector of public interest, is dominated by dominant politicians and intellectuals and the businessmen who in a repetitive manner imitate each other. Yes, and they remind me like a hero of Anton Chekhov's great story, The Man in the Case. It's a Belikov school teacher who is like hijacked of paranoias, of certain fears. He's kind of isolated from his town, but he still influences everybody, and he wants other people to think like him. So the neoliberal elites, on the one hand, they are distanced with people, but on the other hand, they always try to influence others and to think that there is no other order than the liberal capitalistic order. Yes, and in this way, it also disturbs, and it also in this way we also see the decline of the welfare state. Yes, and we see the decline of welfare state because we live in a completely different historical era or completely different historical order. And what I'm trying to say is that in post-World War European welfare state, I believe, was not the advent of the reformed capitalism. It wasn't a result of reformed capitalism, but rather it was a result of the powerful social mobilization of trade unions and labor movements, and then it was because of the catastrophes of the capitalists, which finally ended up with Second World War. And what is very important, the successful formation of the welfare state model after the Second World War in Europe was thanks to the Soviet Union, because the European capitalists were afraid of Soviet communist expansion. Yes, and they had to think something, and they had to keep the order in the other way. And so they were kind of forced to think in a different way and to decline certain ideals of the classical liberalism. So what I'm trying to say is that even when it comes about struggle for social justice, and if we take a look to the historical phase, from the historical perspective, it always happened not because of not because of the commitment of certain labor movements, but because the political elites were afraid of other big power, and that was the communist power, the Soviet Union. But today, there is no any powerful communist power who may influence this process in Europe, yes? And who may force like politicians to think in a different way. And so in the end, I just wanted to ask you, what would you say about it? Do you believe that it is to organize a powerful social mobilization, even for example, a precariat class, in order to bring a different Europe or a different world, in order to form a different social reality, even though, again, there is no a concrete ideological global project like it was Soviet Union, who may influence the liberal political class of Europe, and not only in Europe? Thank you very much.
Well, Baga, thank you for that question. In fact, the main message of my book is that we can mobilize a very broad anti-capitalist coalition without reliance on the beautiful socialist utopia, because in my mind it was not so beautiful. It also destroyed the environment. Real socialism was very bad for also human beings and the environment. So we should be able to mobilize this anti-capitalist coalition without reliance on utopia, on crisis, although crisis helps, but also crisis makes people, triggers conservative instincts. So it is unfortunate. I think the left is short-sighted in its trust that crisis can radicalize people towards progressive ideals. Actually, it makes people encrust them and to cling to the familiar, to the old. That is why we have seen so many people vote for to the right, the far right and the center right, in the context of the economic crisis of the past decade, after the financial meltdown. So we should not be relying on crisis. We cannot rely on revolution, and we cannot be relying on the utopias, at least not the available ones, which have not been able to really show the road ahead. But I believe that at least before the pandemic, we had come to a point in the development of what I described as precarity capitalism, that exactly because the destabilization of the life world also afflicts the winners in the distribution of gains from capitalism, that the winning comes at a very high price. Mental health disorders, lots of stress, a lifestyle that many people in fact do not embrace because they're socialized to like a different kind of life. So that a very broad coalition has been growing, including the rich and the people with the envious jobs. So this is where my hopes are.
I see. Thank you. I also hope so that this will work in the end.
Great. Thank you. We still have we still are in good time. So we were planning to use a function here called raise your hand, where you should be able to give a sign that you want to ask a question or make a comment, but not everyone perhaps sees that. So so let's just do it the old-fashioned way. Does anyone want to ask the next question to Albena?
If there is a chat function, maybe people can write their question.
Yes. Well, we are not seeing anyone asking for the word, but.
So maybe I can just continue with something that I didn't have time to say. It seems to me that before, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. There actually one. Lisa has a question.
There is a question.
So Lisa, please.
I know, but make your point first, and then I can ask afterwards.
Okay, good.
No, I think that questions.
After you.
Okay. Well, hi Albina, hi everyone, and thanks for this. So I wanted to ask you to say a bit more about the kind of institutions you are imagining that would. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Albina looked like she couldn't. Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you could say a bit more about the institutions against precarity that are imagining. And if I wanted to provoke you here and play a little bit devil's advocate, I would say, well, we need social insurance and a very old-fashioned sense of those who are lucky insuring everyone, and sort of because we all don't know how we will be affected, we need to go back to that kind of solidarity that gets expressed in very old-fashioned instruments of social insurance. But the problem I see there is that so far social insurance mechanisms have been national. And you sound like you want something that is much more global. And I wanted to ask you to expand a bit on what you're imagining there.
Great. Thank you for that question. Indeed, I think that this kind of stabilization should come in, particularly in our times when automation is destroying more jobs than it's creating, and we cannot only rely on solid, good employment. We need to be seeking voluntary employment flexibility. But that could be enabled only through kind of across-the-board social insurance, which is not sourced from the employment contract. So that would mean that can be solved through European social insurance. That is even not so much citizenship, but denizenship based. Now, everybody who lives in Europe, in the EU, for instance, could be entitled to such social insurance. Curiously enough, we are seeing this kind of, I'm very surprised, this shift emerging. Before the pandemic already, the European Commission had launched the European Green Deal. Much as it is criticized, it is a big step in the right direction. But during the pandemic, the European Commission launched a reinsurance scheme actually funded through Eurobonds. So that is, this is, in my mind, this is a policy shift exactly in the direction that we need. A trans-European social safety net mandated by the European central decisional bodies. Over to you.
Thank you. You want to follow up on that, Lisa? Well, probably not. Okay, good. So, Albina, you want to make the point that you...
Actually, this is, I did make the point. It seems to me that we're very close to a policy shift. Now, the danger is that because the budgets would be so much burdened with debt, that there wouldn't be a courage to continue in that direction. So that's, for me, it's the point of fragility, that whenever we have already seen the capacity of governments to prioritize social interests over short-term economic gains, the capacity, even the decisional capacity of the European Commission is there, the infrastructure is there, only the political will and the political guts we need to continue in that direction. I hope the governments are not scared by the depleted budgets.
Okay. Now, let me see. Liam, you have a question.
Hello, Albina. It was a very interesting talk. I really liked the ideas, and the Progressive International sounds like a great idea. I come from the UK, and it feels like the public there has really internalized the neoliberal logic from the government and from the media. So I'm wondering, how can we build a consensus for the ideas you're talking about in that sort of environment, where if you present ideas like this, people will say it's not possible, we can't afford it, it's too radical, and you can never get anywhere with that discussion, I find, when I try and have it. At least outside of academia, when I try and have that conversation.
Well, look, every idea is only as strong as the social forces behind it. And we see signs that social forces are uniting behind certain ideas. It was a groundbreaking thing that, in fact, if you think that the European Commission, which is, dominated by center-right parties, which are usually so much pro-business, they are pushing for the green agenda as well. So my hope is that, in fact, there are powerful voices, even within the establishment, that are pushing in the right direction. Now, the trouble is that the left, parts of the left, are becoming part of the trouble, because, as I said, calls for more equality within an unjust system play in the hands of the neoliberal agenda. So I think the left needs to be a little bit more self-critical. I would start with that.
Thanks. Okay, Jose, you want to jump in?
Yes. Hello everyone. So my question is a sort of follow-up of Lisa's question. So Lisa asked you about how you would create some kind of global solidarity, and my question refers to that global dimension as well. So what kind of vision do you have for building up a new global governance? So more specifically, do you think that we should try to reform the institutions that we have, the United Nations and so on? Or are you thinking rather in something totally new that we should build up more democratically, bottom up? Or what kind of vision do you have for the global governance?
Yes. See, I have developed this notion of, I believe in subversion. I do not believe in overthrowing. Maybe because of my experience with the dissident movements in Bulgaria, I was involved in those movements, and we tried to overthrow the regime, and it just didn't go that well, because it evolved into something quite undemocratic gradually. Despite all appearance. So I would say let's subvert the system rather than try to overthrow it. That means to work with the material we already have. Therefore, my answer is yes, let's work with those institutions. Let us build a very broad alliance of social forces. Look, when we look at the big shifts, paradigm shifts in the models of well-being, the shift towards the welfare state after the crisis of the 19th century capitalism. This was not just a matter of the class struggle and of the progressive union mobilization. If you read Karl Polanyi, he reminds us that a very broad coalition of forces united to push for the welfare state. The left, the right, even the Catholic Church. So the next iteration of this big shift was towards, the neoliberal 80s. There was this, what Nancy Fraser has brilliantly described as progressive neoliberalism. It's not that there was so progressive, but that the center left accepted the free market agenda of the right, and the right accepted the progressive politics agenda of the left for, cultural diversity, gender equality, some environmental commitments. So there is this cross-ideological joining of forces at every time that a big shift occurred. So I'm saying, let's build alliances against, the most nefarious working of capitalism, and use the existing institutions. This would be my advice.
Okay, thanks. Now I don't see that there's anyone wanting to ask a question right now, so maybe I'll jump in with one myself. I was just wondering, Bakar also mentioned this, the question about the way we evaluate the past, the way in which there was a balance between forces and the welfare society was built up during the Cold War, which may be explained to some extent because of the existence of the communist countries and so on. But you specifically mentioned one thing that was devastated at that time, and this is the environment. And that brings me to this question that I think is so intriguing when we are thinking about, I think I'm continuing sort of with the idea that you're talking about basing something new and progressive on the existing institutions rather than fighting for the overthrow. So the question is, isn't it? I would be worried about any kind of. There seem to be multiple issues that we're dealing with. Injustice is just one of them. There are other issues as well. So when I listen to the progressive agenda, which places so much emphasis on capitalism and seems to be anti-capitalistic, although it might not be in the end, it also seems to be oriented against the free market, although in the end it will say, well, we also need the free market. Still, I start to think, isn't it? Shouldn't we think about the issues as multiple challenges, where injustice and precarity is certainly big, but only one of many different issues, rather than the big issue?
Look, for me, institutions are kind of structural levers, to enable certain kind of action. We need to be clear what kind of action we want. If we identify that, as I do in my book, that the real enemy is, well, the source of at least in the current context, is the intensification of the competitive production of profit. So we need to just construct institutions, if they're missing, that enable us to fight the competitive production of profit. There's the left tends to center on collective ownership, the classical formula of collective ownership of the means of production. But think about it, workers can own the factories, and they can own stocks, as it is now very much proposed in the companies where they work, and still they can be trapped in that global competition for profits. The state can be owning the economy and still can be pursuing the competitive production of profit with all the negative impact on individuals and nature. So yeah, I'm saying let's stay focused on what we have identified as the cause of the problem. And if we need new institutions, build them. If the institutions are already there, use them. Yeah.